For those of you living under a rock, Magic the Gathering expanded back in 2019 to include intellectual properties outside of Magic and outside of Hasbro. They didn't come into the main story, but there are cards of other intellectual properties. We had Walking Dead, Street Fighter, Stranger Things, Fortnite, Warhammer 40,000, Blood Bowl, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Transformers, Arcane, and if we include the slightly different product line that isn't Universes Beyond, including reskins in the mainline sets, we also get to include Bram Stoker's Dracula, Godzilla, Dungeons & Dragons, both the board game and the animated TV show, and Post Malone. And no, I'm not joking about any of this. Post Malone is part of the Universes Beyond. And yes, I probably missed one. I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet, and today we're talking about the Universes Beyond and what that means for reprints and contracts in the background going forward. There's going to be some conjecture, there's going to be some theorizing, there's going to be a little bit of tinfoil hat wearing in this video. All of this is nothing compared to what's to come. The Walking Dead Secret Lair was one of the most commercially successful products Wizards of the Coast have ever put out, and the most successful Secret Lair they've ever put out. And the Warhammer 40,000 decks were incredibly popular and critically applauded, although of course there were detractors too. All of that just means that this is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. I personally loved these mashups. As long as Magic keeps its core identity and invests in its own worlds and doesn't lose sight of what makes Magic Magic, I think using the game system to have the best mashup card game ever is actually super fun and interesting. And I mean that too. I think people are saying that Wizards and Magic as a product is losing sight of what made Magic Magic, as I look at my Magic poster to the side over here, and I don't think it is. I think they're focusing quite heavily on their canon, lore and storylines going forward, with this culminating multiverse thread thing. That's a video for another time though, perhaps. All of these crossovers do come with some pitfalls though, and some criticisms. On the horizon we have crossovers for Lord of the Rings, not the movies but the books, Doctor Who, Final Fantasy and Assassin's Creed. And that's just the ones we know about. There's bound to be a ton more next year and into 2024. But I want to observe a growing trend of them stepping on their own toes, of tripping before they're running, where there's some weird contractual disputes with these other intellectual properties, and that causes issues with reprints and the cost of collectibles and card game staples. All that and more in today's video, but before we get started, I do need to pay my mortgage, so here's a message from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Magic Spoon. I'm a cereal fiend, not just for breakfast, but as a nice milky snack. And that's where Magic Spoon comes in, like a milky, valiant, protein-filled white knight. Ooh woo. Magic Spoon is here to save the day with childlike nostalgia with their flavours and delicious and fueling high protein cereal. Each bowl has 13 to 14 grams of protein, 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, so I get to feel full and confident that I'm hitting my macros. Most recently they sent me these breakfast bars too. These have 10 grams of protein per bar, they come in great flavours just like the cereal, including cocoa and peanut butter, my personal favourite. There are a variety of flavours to choose from and you can peruse the options in the link in the description below. So hit the link and grab your own variety pack today, and it helps to support the show. They ship to Canada and the UK too, by the way, so they do respect the old world. Canada's not the old world, but the UK is. They have a 100% happiness guarantee, so hit that link, use the code Kenobi at checkout, or head to magicspoon.com/Kenobi. Thanks again to Magic Spoon for supporting the channel. So Final Fantasy and Assassin's Creed come to Magic next year, and by next year I mean 2024. This video was recorded in 2023. They are coming in secret lairs, which is a tried and true tested approach that sells and makes money. Meanwhile, Lord of the Rings is going to be a modern legal set simply to encourage more people to buy the cards. I literally have no idea as to why this is modern legal beyond that. This has never happened before, the closest thing being perhaps Modern Horizons, but that wasn't from an external IP, it was just a new Magic set. It's the first time we're having a new Magic set go directly into Modern. Modern Horizons itself, the jury is still out on whether it was a net positive for Modern, and Lord of the Rings is going to try and sell packs through a competitive format that it feels like Wizards don't really embrace anyway. It's weird. Beyond the modern legality though, I am actually really quite excited for Lord of the Rings. I think it'll be a really interesting and refreshing break from the Magic storyline. I do love Lord of the Rings itself. I love seeing like the Magic designers design versions of iconic creatures and cards and characters, Gandalf, Gollum and the rest of the Fellowship. But can they reprint Gandalf when the license runs out? Well, yes and no. I'll explain as we go. Beyond that, we also have Doctor Who Commander products coming, and after how good the Warhammer 40k decks were, I'm quite excited to see how they tackle that thematic space as well. Although again, licensing issues and contracts, can they reprint Daleks? Can they again? Well, the answer is yes and no. A kind of in-between, a sloppy band-aid that might create more issues as we proceed. And in order to explain why there's an issue here potentially, and again, it's a little bit of theorizing here, I want to explain some of the history of Secret Lair and some of the issues and holes we've seen with Universes Beyond in general. We had a rough start to all this with Walking Dead, which was a mess on multiple levels. The product was so polarizing that Mitch from the Commander's quarters cried on camera, made a community-driven alternative to Commander, and accidentally opened a Discord for racists. That was a wild fucking summer. Anyway, not only was it the opening of the floodgates for the Universes Beyond concept, something tested with the Godzilla cards in Ikoria, and thus the reaction was largely negative, but it also reared the first of the ugly issues with reprints. When Walking Dead was given to us as a Secret Lair, it both brought us new characters from outside of Magic's IP in terms of characters from Walking Dead, but also mechanically unique cards. What I mean by that are cards that are, well, mechanically unique. They can't be found in another product. They aren't in a deck, they aren't in another draft set. They are a card only in the Secret Lair with that mechanical identity. Rick said that's leader. What it does, its power and toughness, all those bits combined, its mechanical identity is unique there. You can't get it anywhere else. This means that if one of those cards becomes incredibly powerful or a staple of Modern or Legacy or Commander, then it needs to be reprinted because the price will go up. The demand will be here and the supply will be here and the demand will begin to grow because there is no other card that does what that card does. The alternative to mechanically unique is a reskin. In the case of Fortnite's Supply Llama, it was a reskin of Ethereum Sculptor. A fucking weird reskin because it makes no thematic sense and it's a complete miss in my opinion, but it was a reskin. So this is just a different copy of Ethereum Sculptor with different art and a different name with a little box telling you what it is reskinning. But the problem with having cards that may need to be reprinted later because they're desirable from a gameplay standpoint is that if they're locked behind a license, you might just not be able to reprint them. Rick Steadfast Leader is literally using the likeness and the name of a character from The Walking Dead. And if we go to like Warhammer here as well, Marnius Calgar is literally a trademarked character name, likeness, and even has a creature type associated with the original canon and product. So basically a question was posed, can you actually reprint these wizards? Are you allowed to when the license agreement or the contract runs out? And Wizards weren't sure either. Beyond that, some people just wanted reprints that weren't Walking Dead themed. They wanted Magic themed ones so they could play Magic without having to have Walking Dead slapped right in the middle of it. I personally don't give a shit, but I get why some people might feel that way. This all meant that it's effectively a brand new reserve list if they can't reprint them. A set of cards that can never be reprinted is a valuable investing opportunity. Marrow came out eventually and saved the day. A little bit late though, after the community collectively lambasted the whole fucking thing and said, well, they could reprint them as reskins essentially. They're going to do what they did with other Secret Lairs, where Ethereum Sculptor was a Magic card that existed already and got reskinned into Supply Llama. They can instead take Rick Steadfast Leader and then reskin it into a new Magic card. So they're going backwards essentially. It did pose the question as to why they didn't do this in the first place, but yeah, I guess it allows them to design around the character from the game as opposed to doing that, releasing it early and then skinning it into the game later. It kind of makes sense in that way. But they never did this. Rick Steadfast Leader never got a reprint. Now reskins did happen with Stranger Things though, and for Street Fighter 2, showing that their commitment to doing this was there and that it was doable. We had cards from both Stranger Things and Street Fighter become printed in Magic canon characters with new names. This meant that you can only still play 4 copies of this card, but you can play like 2 copies of the Stranger Things version, 2 copies of the Magic thing, and they're completely different names and no indication on them really, barring like a number down the bottom of the card, that they correspond to each other. I think it is kind of messy. It's not very elegant. Funnily enough, the Walking Dead Secret Lair cards I've seen more eternal play than the Street Fighter or Stranger Things ones, mainly with Rick Steadfast Leader seeing a little bit of fringe play in Legacy Humans, not a huge amount, but a little bit. The fact that it saw a little bit of play and then got no reskin and no reprint is interesting. I would assume that there was just no plan to reprint the Walking Dead cards ahead of time. Somehow Wizards of the Coast walked into this project and someone signed a contract somewhere and approved the product with just no consideration for how they're going to print these into the wild again later down the line. It's a huge oversight in my opinion, and the fact that we haven't seen the Walking Dead one since suggests to me that there's some sort of contractual issue there. I'll come back to that more in a moment after I explain the next example of things we've seen. The Warhammer 40k decks were phenomenal. I reached out to Wizards of the Coast when they were announced and I said to them, look, I'm a perfect person to try and show these off. I have a lot of enthusiasm for both properties and they worked with me on it. So there's a bias there, I guess, in me saying that I love them because I got to reveal one of them. But I do love them. I think they're one of the most thematically flavorful products they've ever released. I think the designs are a slam dunk. There are some issues in terms of distribution and the methodology in getting those cards out into the game and how they're going to print them again. Let's unpack that a bit. They're wonderful. I really, really loved them. I'm going to say it time and time again, it was a home run. The flavour and design was out of this world. Thematic through lines, deep cuts, and powerful yet not oppressive levels of new design space. However, they did introduce hundreds, or nearly hundreds, of new cards to Magic, which is kind of wild. Each deck, all 4 of them, had 40 plus new cards in them. A lot of mechanically unique cards in one place. Again, these didn't fit to being reprinted elsewhere. You couldn't have a Space Marine just randomly show up in Innistrad, for example, making them difficult to reprint off the bat anyway. But there were new considerations and issues on top of that. Firstly, the set included trademarked creature types and stuff like that. So Space Marines are creature type Astartes, which is like the low Gothic in-canon name for what a Space Marine is. And you also had Tyranids and Necrons, all names that are, if not trademarked, at least part of the intellectual property and could be argued in a court of law to belong to Games Workshop. When you reprint a Universes Beyond Secret Lair card, you end up keeping all the texts and that affect the gameplay and keep them all the same. Abilities, creature types, parent offerings, etc. You change the name, and the rule, like I said, says you can play only 4 copies of the corresponding cards, but everything about them stays the same, because it being a human wizard or a human soldier is relevant to a lot of things. Creature types matter in Magic for effects that affect creature types. However, when in the case of Marneus Calgar, for example, if your contract runs out with Games Workshop, you probably can't use Astartes again. Like I said, it may not be copyrighted as such, but I'm pretty sure it's part of their intellectual rights, their intellectual property. Mark Rosewater was wheeled out again by Wizards of the Coast to deal with this, I'm going to say, oversight. It's weird that they hadn't considered this up until this point. I do feel bad for Mark. He often gets wheeled out to be the mouthpiece of Magic because he's willing to engage with the community, and that often gets him a lot of stick when I think he doesn't deserve it. He explained that we could easily just make a new creature type in Magic to correspond with these. So Necron, Tyranid, Astartes, as examples, would all get their Magic versions. No, Astartes would become... It can't be Soldier. What would it be? Superman. No, that's bad. Either way, I'm actually blanking, didn't write it down. That's fucking stupid. You get your own versions. Tyranid would become Alien, for example, as I think the one I've used in the past. Sure, cool, good, and great. So what would happen is we'd have 2 creature types that count as one another, with different names and now different creature types that counts as. Again, I think it's clunky. I don't really like it, but whether it's clunky and cumbersome or not, it is a solution. Further to all this, we found out thanks to the development team of MTGO, the Magic the Gathering online client, via their Discord, that they're not contractually allowed to add the cards to Modo on a 1-by-1 basis. Usually when a card breaks into older formats like Legacy, Modern or Commander, the MTGO developers will look to put the card onto MTGO, so a lot of products don't come out, supplementary sets like the Warhammer Precons, for example. And instead of having to put all those cards on there for only a fraction of them to get used, they lessen the workload because the client doesn't have anywhere near as much attention as it deserves by just adding some cards. These cards added to like prize crates that you get for winning events and such. It's not a perfect system. I'll go as far as to say it's quite a bad system, which is probably a whole video in and of itself, but that's not the point of this video. Essentially, that's what they do. They add 1-by-1 cards. When they've been pressed multiple times about what to do with the Warhammer cards, are we going to get the Triumph of St. Catherine, a card that's being seen play in Legacy? They come out and said they couldn't add them on a 1-by-1 basis because of a contractual obligation. This suggests there's a contract somewhere between Games Workshop and Warhammer. As I suggest, it all but confirms it, right? That there's a contract between Games Workshop and Wizards of the Coast, so that you can't release these cards in single incidents of themselves. You couldn't re-release a Best of Warhammer pack, for example. They've got to come in their original guise. They've got to come in their original 100-card pre-com. And with an MTGO developer saying that, I can only assume this contract is the same for paper, Magic the Gathering Online, and I'd assume Arena too. We may never see these cards on Arena for that reason, because they have to release a whole Commander deck, a whole 100-card Brawl deck with these cards in them, which is something we've never really seen before on Arena, and they don't seem to have the appetite to do at current. And this is wild to me, and very lazy perhaps. It stinks of negligence. It feels like an absolute misunderstanding of the game, reprints, and the second-hand economy, essentially, or a lack of care towards any of those things on the part of the people at Wizards who drew up these contracts. How the fuck was this not a consideration ahead of time? And this is why I think we may never see Rick Steadfast Leader. I wonder if the original contract may have even just like legalese, is that what I'm looking for? Like written them into a hole where they can't actually reprint a version of that card with the Rick name or not. It may become a joint collective item between HBO and Wizards. Is it HBO? I don't fucking know. HBO and Wizards, and they can't ever really tap into that well again. But instead of telling us that, which would be embarrassing, they might just ignore it for a while. And bear in mind, Rick is currently sitting at $40 on the secondary market and will only go up from here as a collectible. We'll probably never really know if that's actually true, but 15 years from now, maybe a Wizards employer will come out and tell us all once they've left the company. It's all conjecture. I know that. It's all hypothesis, it's all theory, I know. But the fact they haven't reprinted any Walking Dead card yet, but we have seen Street Fighter and we have seen Stranger Things, it has me reaching for that tinfoil hat. And that brings me to the Lord of the Rings cards. Half of which will be generically named enough to be found in random sets in the future, so we can have, like, this is a bad example, but a card called Magic Potion, for example. But all the characters, locations, and sagas naming Tolkien estate-owned things and events from the game, from the books, sorry, they can't really be reprinted as they are, they have to be reskinned. It's not an elegant solution, but reskinning is a solution. But beyond that, we then have the Doctor Who cards. Commander decks, so that's multiple, likelihood 3 to 4 decks, adding 40 cards again each time if they take the same process as the Warhammer decks, which I assume they will to allow them to explore design space within Doctor Who. A world in which you often see British phone boxes and Catherine Tate, things that should never actually be in Magic itself. So again, more reskins. Meanwhile, as these release, I predict that we will have no universes within reprints of 40k or Walking Dead because the license makes them have to put them entirely in 100 card sealed products or some nonsense. Maybe Games Workshop are scared of booster boxes or something because of gambling laws. So now we have all of these cards, these huge amounts of mechanically unique outside of Magic canon cards, and where the hell are they going to reprint them all in canon? In the list slot? They're never going to get there. They struggle to put like fucking 10 Secret Lair cards in there. The point I'm getting at is that we might have more products than ever with these Secret Lair things, but that gives them less space to reprint things. You can't put Marneus Calgar in the Lord of the Rings set, for example. More and more products and less room to reprint some of these cards because of the contractual obligations associated with them. We might get to a situation where we see like Warhammer cards get reskinned directly into another franchise. We'll see a Space Marine become something in not Lord of the Rings, but the next crossover thing. Looking around my room, it's just Warhammer and Magic. What exists other than Warhammer and Magic? Star Trek. We'll get a Warhammer reskin into Star Trek before we get the Magic version of it. That is the world we might be living in. Wizards have had times where they've struggled to reprint things correctly in the past, and they couldn't manage reprint equity. Not being able to dip into the well enough due to minimal releases that they could fit them in, and instead they allowed prices to balloon in formats like Modern and Legacy. Now we have more product than ever, half of them can't see the reprints that we need. Shiv and Reef, for example, is a Magic card referencing a Magic place, and you can't exactly put that into the Fortnite set unless you reskin it. It just leads to a situation where it's clunky and awkward to get these cards reprinted. This is not a situation that happens overnight. We haven't just clicked our fingers and there's a new reserve list, but it does suggest a growing, teething problem, or perhaps an ongoing issue with the contractual obligations around the Secret Lairs and universes beyond the products. It's not going to kick your dog, it's not going to ruin your Christmas, but it's just a thing that I've been thinking about, especially the Warhammer decks. Like, when will we see those cards shop anywhere else? Hopefully it is a teething problem, like I said, and over time they've learned from this, and each contract that they've made since has been much better at giving them space and leeway to do the right thing and be able to reprint these cards within Magic or an alternative version of them later down the line. Hopefully future products won't be stuck in some sort of weird Games Workshop style chokehold like the Warhammer decks apparently are right now if they want to go into Modo or Arena. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I just thought it was an interesting look back at these products and some of the issues we've had and what they might tell us about what issues we're going to have in the future. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. I love to read all the comments in the comment section below, and I'll see you all soon. Oh, like the video and subscribe. Do all the YouTuber stuff. Apparently, it's not cool to ask for that sort of thing. Apparently, your content's shit if you do ask for it, but I don't give a fuck. Just click those buttons, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.